Hello everyone and welcome to a Jerry's Live workshop. My name is Emmy Klein and I will be your instructor for today's class. I am very excited for today's class. It's going to be an in-depth instruction on watercolors, and we're going to be approaching it for those who are for beginners. So if you are a little bit more advanced, this might not be, we're going to be going a lot over the basics. So it might be one of those things where this would be a great refresher. But if you are somebody who has always been interested in watercolor, I'm going to go over all types of things watercolor and how to control this medium. So I'm very excited for that. Now, if you do have questions throughout the entire show, make sure you put them in the chat so my amazing moderator, Amanda, can ask me live while we're here. And if you are watching this in the future and you have questions about whether it's a technique or a product, whatever it may be, make sure you put the comment in under our video so that we will always go back and check and make sure we answer that way. So if you are interested in anything that I'm going to be using in today's class, go to the website JerrysArtarama.com and type in today's class code, which is JLW3. So JLW3, and then the teacher's card should come up and everything I'm using should be in there. And then if I decide to add anything, we'll add it in later. So watercolors. Let's start with what a watercolor is. So that is a paint that is very approachable, just because all you have to have is paint, a brush, and water, and of course paper. So it is, and actually we can go to that overhead because I can show you exactly what it is. Let me also, I'm going to pull my water. I have my favorite water bucket here, and I'll explain why that's my favorite water bucket in a minute. But I have that, so I just have a brush here that is, I really do love these. These are the, oh, I'm really bad at pronouncing this. Borciani and Bonazzi. You gotta say it like you're Italian. Borciani and Bonazzi. But this is one of their brushes. I really love it. It has a great snap to the bristle, so I really enjoy it. But, so watercolors. I have my pans over here. Watercolor does come in pans, which are these cute little squares that are, this is an empty one, so they're filled with just the watercolor, but they also come in tubes, by the way. So if you wanted to refill them, you could. Like the lemon yellow here is in this pan, and this is lemon yellow, same brand, same paint. So if I start running out of that, I can refill it. Now, let's say I also wanted to add in a color and I have something here that I don't love. I could very easily, like this neutral tint, it's not in this palette, and I love the neutral tint. It's such a pretty color. And actually, I might as well swatch with that because I did fill a pan. And that empty pan, all you have to do is just fill it up and let it dry, and then it's ready to go. And then you can swap these out, which is great. So all you have to do is take water on a brush, apply it to the pan, and start painting. It's just that easy. Now, I say it's just that easy. It gets a little bit more complicated from there. So the way that watercolor works is the more water you add, the lighter that color is going to get. Now also, I think there's a bit of a glare just because it's wet. So the more water you add, the lighter it gets. Now, if I take most of the water off of my brush and I pull a lot of pigment off on that and apply it that way, it has a lot less water, so the darker it gets. And when I say darker, because this is just this particular color, but like say with the yellow, it'll get more saturated with the pigment, and it'll get less saturated with the pigment when you add more water. That's really how this works in just the most basic way I can explain it. Now, there is another way of lightening your colors. So say I take this neutral tint, lay it down, I'm gonna clean off my brush. There is a white watercolor. I have opaque white right here. So if I take that, and I'm gonna just mix it while it's on my paper here, and kind of mix it together. You can also mix it on the tin here, or like if you have a palette, but it gives it a different kind of feel. So put that off to the side. This is lightening that color with water. This is lightening it with white. Now, none of these are wrong, okay? I do need to go out on that limb and say that's not wrong. If you lighten it with white, I'm just saying there's going to be a difference in look. This is going to look chalky and kind of pastel-y, so if that's something you're looking for in your work, that's great. If you're not, if you want to preserve that transparency of watercolors, which is really what this medium is about, you control it with your water. Now I do know there are some times out there, if you do go for like watercolor shows, they make sure that they have rules sometimes that say you cannot use white, so pay attention to that if that's something that we're interested in. So just that is one little caveat when you use an opaque white. Essentially, it's getting into gouache territory, but we'll touch more base on what gouache is and deal with that in a little bit later in the show. So with watercolor, that's the basis of what it is. Now, to talk a little bit more about these supplies, I do have, let me actually close this here real fast. This is the Lucas set of 48. I really love this tin of watercolors. I do have in it this little swatch card that I did fill out myself, and it is separate. This is the New York Central watercolor swatch cards. They come in like, I think, a pack of 5 for this particular size. They also do have smaller ones for like the smaller sets of watercolors, but this tin, when you open it up, you have all the beautiful colors there, and I just went ahead and swatched all of them on this swatch card right here, which is actually the same paper as what I'm working on today, which is the New York Central watercolor paper. Now, I do have 2 options here as far as watercolor paper, and I did want to touch base on that. I have hot press and I have cold press. And I apologize for the glare. It's a little hard to kind of like not have that happen. But both of these are essentially the same paper with the same size. It's the same makeup because it is 100% cotton, and it is 140 pound. Now, when I say 140 pound, what that means is the thickness of the paper. 140 pound is a really consistent, very standard watercolor paper. It is thicker than like your printer paper, and the reason why is because as soon as you get that wet, printer paper specifically, it's going to start buckling on you. It's going to start warping. So if you ever have a problem with your paper going like this and pulling your color in places you don't want it to be, you're fighting your paper and you need to get better paper. So 140 pound is amazing, but it still can buckle if you get it drenched in water. So the way that I kind of combat that is by using a block, because it's watercolor block. So what that means, and ignore the drawings for now, it is glued on all 4 sides except for this tiny little spot right here where I can then separate that paper as soon as I'm done. What that does is as I'm painting on this paper, it's going to keep my paper in place. So as it dries, all of those fibers of the paper are contracting in on itself, and it's going to keep itself flat. It's also going to not be able to buckle as much. Now, that's the way that I typically combat it. Now, you can also tape your paper down to, say, a gator board, which is just anything that's non-absorbent, because you don't want the surface of what you're painting on to also buckle, because that's a whole different nightmare. But it's one of those things where having a block or having your paper secure is going to really help you. Now, I wanted to go over some techniques, some really basic techniques. I'm going to do it in 2 different ways. So if you actually look at this, these are identical in the sense of I have the same exact things written on every square. The reason why is because I have my hot press versus my cold press, but I was going to work on a big square on this one and just kind of explain the technique. But I have found that taking that technique and putting it into a shape is a whole different ballgame in the sense of like it's harder to control, and you can see me work in real time now. So rather than just laying down a big square, you now get to see it in action as well. And then at the end of the show, we're going to take all these techniques and try to use them in a whole painting. So that is the plan for today. And so let's jump into our techniques. So first up, we have a flat wash. Now, when it comes to a flat wash, this is usually a large section of area that you want to lay down, just a big tone. So let me pick a color here. What are we going to work with? let's go. I love this purple. This purple is a really great color. And we'll just bounce around to all the different colors, right? So what I do love about this Lucas Lucas watercolor is that it activates really fast. So it doesn't take a whole lot of scrubbing or time to get a good amount of pigment. And you can see that in that puddle. So one thing that is really great, now we are just working on technique, so it doesn't really matter all that much, but it will matter when it comes to your paintings. So if you have a scrap piece of paper that happens to be the exact same as what you're working on, it's really helpful because then you can take your wash and test it to see just how dark it is, or how pigmented it is, I should say. Now, pigment, for anybody who doesn't know, let me explain that. Because watercolor is a binder and pigment. A pigment is what the color is, right? So this is a purple pigment. It's literally called purple. And so that's that pigment. Now the binder is what makes it stick and what kind of is the carrier of said pigment. And for watercolor, it is gum arabic. That's essentially a tree sap, which for anybody out there, it's similar to sugar, which is why it's water soluble, which is really cool. And that's why it's so different from acrylic or even oils, where the binder is an acrylic polymer or oil. So back to techniques. Flat wash. We are literally the idea is to just lay one continuous flat wash down without having any blobs or adjustments in color. So essentially, just a big chunk of color that is nice and consistent, right? Just like that. Now that little bit of pigment that's kind of pooled right there, since this is wet, it will take the path of least resistance and it will kind of smooth itself out. But that is a big flat wash right there. Now, if you ever have a hard time getting a flat wash consistent, check your brush size, because you want to work with the largest brush you can for a flat wash, but not so big that it's going to be a problem. So for example, with this, I wanted to do a little flower because we are getting into spring and I thought flowers would be great for watercolors. This brush is about the same size as those petals, which would definitely work, but unless you are very, very comfortable with this brush and the shape that you're painting, there's a potential for you to overpaint and go past your lines. So I'm going to grab a brush that's a little bit smaller and actually a little bit different of a shape. So this is, I believe, a cat's tongue. You can also use a filbert. Sorry, I was trying to remember the word for that. A filbert, which is a similar shape, but it doesn't come to as much of a point. Those are really great for florals. You can also use a round, but this happens to be the largest round brush that I have. So that's why I'm saying I want to use the largest brush I can, because if I try to paint in that whole thing with this brush, if round is the way that you want to go, that's fine, but you would need something larger, because by the time you get all of that filled in, you're going to have some weird variation where I think you're going to be struggling trying to get it fully filled in. And again, all this is about experimentation and playing with your art supplies, and that's why we're just doing fun techniques with like shapes and stuff that are pretty simplistic, and if it doesn't work out perfectly, it's not the end of the world. This is where you really can just like cut loose and have fun. So again, flat wash, but we're going to fill in the whole shape, right? And I'm going to start kind of on one corner and use my brush shape to my advantage. And the idea is I don't want to have a dry edge for too long. So if I started filling in all of this, this might dry and that would be a problem. So I'm going to try and keep pulling that color just across this flower without stopping and letting that edge dry. Because as soon as it dries, that's when I'll get a weird hard edge, and I overpainted it a little bit, which is okay, but flat wash on a flower. Now, it's kind of boring, so we're gonna go to a different kind of wash, a graded wash. Because while this is great for like an initial color, or if you wanna just lay down a big flat color, this is perfect for that. But the next one is gonna be a little bit more complicated and a little bit funner as far as like the look of it. So I'm going to go back to my big square brush. This is a flat. So I'm gonna grab that, and I'm going to use a different color because I want variety today. We need colors today. So I think I'm gonna go with something a little darker. I kind of want to go with a Payne's gray, but Payne's gray is a really dark, like gray blue, which is really lovely. So I'm going to go with a very light wash. And again, we can always test it on our scrap piece of paper. I think that's pretty right there. Yes. I don't want it too dark, right? Okay, so with a graded wash, the idea is we're going to go from fully saturated, which technically this is not fully saturated. I want it to be blue, but not crazy blue. And then I'm going to have it go down to a nothing, essentially water. So we are going to have to move kind of quick again. And then as soon as I get about halfway down, I'm going to start pulling just water. I'm going to start with just water, and I'm going to kind of have it meet up in the middle. The idea is if you work a little bit back and forth, you can get that gradation. Notice I turned my brush because I want to actually drag that blob of water that I had. I'm going to try and drag that up a little bit. Now, I think this is a little too white, a little too light, I should say, so I'm going to add a little bit more pigment to my brush and start dragging it through the top and back down. But then I'm going to start pulling it back up. Now, I did not get a very nice consistent there, so before it dries, I'm going to go actually back down to the bottom and work my way back up just to kind of clean it up a little. There we go. So that's a graded wash. So it goes from saturated to nothing. Now technically there is another one where it's going from one color to another color. That's a variegated wash, and I can show you that if you guys want to see that. But we'll do that on a different paper. So if you guys do want to see that, let me know in the comments. But while I'm doing this, I'll wait for those comments to come in, because now we got to do a graded wash on our flower. Now what I want to do is I want to have the center of this flower be really saturated, and I want it to go out to nothing on the edge of the petals. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually get the edges of the petals wet first. This is, especially when I'm doing my my swatches here, I like to get the bottom, because this is a graded wash, I like to get the bottom wet first, and then I like to pull that pigment into it, and then it's the fastest way I can find to get that wash be nice and consistent. So just clean water, and this is, by the way, why I love my bucket of water where it's split. This is where I wash it off first, and then I start pulling this one, and then this is still pristine clean. So it's a really nice bucket. If you do watercolors, it's lovely. Now, if you don't have that bucket, you can get it on JerrysArtarama.com, but you can also use just 2 cups of water, 3 if you want to have the same amount of like buckets as me, or just get the bucket. It's worth it. So, all right, I'm gonna start with just clean water. And the best part about this is that if I don't finish this, like if I decide now, like if I have a kid and I need to go do something really fast all of a sudden, I can just leave this and that water is going to evaporate and nothing's wrong with it. I can always come back to it again. If I start talking like I am right now and I forget that I'm painting and I need to, you know, come back to this and re-wet that paper, it's okay. It can always happen again. Usually when you are dealing with watercolors, you're going to be racing against time because you are fighting that watercolor evaporating, but there is a point where you're not going to have to do any of that, right? So let me test my swatch again. That's a little dark, but that's okay. I'm gonna go really dark right in the middle and then kind of work my way around, right? And then I'm going to start getting that gradation a little bit softer on each petal. Now, when I rinse my brush, I took my paper towel or my rag, and I'm getting the excess water off, because if I add a bunch of water to this, I am now fighting too much water. So if you're finding that you're having just a big puddle and it's all running together and you don't know what to do to control it, dry it off a little bit more. That way you can control it a little bit easier and better. So that's a gradation from like the center out, which is kind of fun. Now I also kind of want just a little bit more pigment right in the middle, and I'll have to kind of work that back in now, just by lightly fluffing this a little bit, you know. Gradation. Now, it's not perfect either. That's okay. We're practicing, right? So, but this is how you can apply this big square to a shape and have it be fun. Now you could also approach each petal completely individually. You don't have to do the entire flower. You could have done the gradation for this and then let it dry, because the second you try to go do another one, it's gonna start pulling over. So if I wanted to do each petal individually, you'd have to let each one dry. Now I do not have the time for that today in today's class. We'd be here for 5 hours and all of my whole team would be a little mad at me. So we're not gonna do that.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes.
We do, in fact, want to do the variegated,
Okay.
what do you call it?
The variegated wash.
Variegated, there we
okay.
go.
All right. So this one takes a little bit more practice. I was hoping you were gonna say no. This is challenging to me. Okay, now I gotta ask, just for the team, which colors are we pulling together? I have 48 colors. Which one?
Phthalo.
Phthalo?
Anything.
Phthalo blue or phthalo green? It's phthalo green. I know it's phthalo green. All right, so phthalo green into what?
Purple.
Yellow?
Honestly,
Ooh, yellow would be pretty.
Yellow would be pretty. So let's do.
Yellow, nice bright.
Oh, okay. All right, you know what? I'm going to, real quick, take my rag and wipe this off, because I'm going to need to prepare my puddles.
We have faith in you.
All right. And then I'm going to also test how pigmented that is. So lemon yellow is what you said, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, this is gonna be bright. Now I'm gonna work with a lighter color first, right? Okay. I'm gonna work from the light color down, and then I'm going to pull my phthalo in, because phthalo is so strong. It's a little, yeah, Katie really threw me a challenge there. All right, so I'm just gonna do a square, cause help. But I'm gonna really load up my yellow at the top here, and then quickly rinse my brush, grab my phthalo. Oh, this is gonna be funky. And then I'm just going to lightly brush it in, and I'm gonna go down a little bit, and then I'm gonna go up a little bit, and I'm applying less and less pressure as I go up. Variegated wash. And you saw how quickly I moved. That's because you have to move that fast. If you let that dry in any way, shape, or form, you're gonna have a hard edge somewhere in there, and it's not going to work as beautifully. Like, I'm kind of proud of myself for that. Hopefully that, yeah, there we go. Yeah, so you just have to move fast when it comes to a variegated wash. So if that is a shape, you just have to know, and maybe even practice on a little side sheet. Like if it were a leaf. Let me try and do this one more time. I'm gonna grab a pencil, right? There we go. All right, let's say I have a leaf, right? Boop. And I want the tip of this to be nice bright yellow. I also still have my puddles still available, and I'm still gonna be, let me actually move this over here. I'm gonna move just as fast, but I'm gonna have to control where my hand and my brush are going. So try and practice this on a little side sheet of paper is a great plan. Now, that yellow is a lot weaker than that phthalo, so I'm going to pull it down further than I intend. Let me give a little bit of a stem here. Meep. All right. Oh, this is where it gets a little difficult. Now, I know I have way too much of that on my brush, so I just use my brush to pull it off a little bit. And then pull it up, pull it down, and there we go. I almost messed it up with too much phthalo. That phthalo's strong. But here's the thing is that it's all about experimentation, and it's all about trying to see what you can do and controlling those colors and controlling the water, which is half the fun with this medium. Okay, so let me pull that off of there. And now we are going to do, actually, I'm sorry, this one. We're going to actually work on these two kind of together because it makes sense to work on them together. Wet on wet versus wet on dry. This is a term you're going to hear a lot when it comes to watercolors. And what you've been seeing me do is wet on dry. Let me work with this Lucas red. So my brush is wet, and now I'm painting on a dry surface. Right? Makes total sense, very simplistic, right? With this, you're going to get crispy edges, right? No surprises at all. Now, of course, I might as well just do this one while I'm at it. We're gonna go just like we did before. We're just filling it in, wet on dry. Now, if I wanted to, I'm gonna actually leave that last petal completely empty, and I'll show you this in a minute. Actually, I'm gonna pull this like it's a full petal into that, all right? So, wet on dry is a very simplistic thing to understand. Now, wet on wet is a little bit more complicated. I'm gonna get this whole square wet. Very
Amy,
easy. Yes.
We have a question really
Yeah.
quick. Suzanne was wondering, so you're working on 2 blocks right now, is that right?
Yes.
Are they both the same block, or is one hot press, one cold press?
They are not the same. One is hot press, one is cold press. And I wanted to show you the differences at the end.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Because we wanted to know the differences as well.
I wanted to show you the difference between hot press and cold press. It is a very subtle difference because technically cold press has more texture and hot press is nice and smooth. That is the basic difference. But when it comes to like painting on it, it is personal preference, but one does have a little bit more of a texture to it, which can affect your watercolors. All right, so this is still wet. It's not sopping wet. You can see the sheen. There's a little bit more of a puddle down here at the bottom, but if I take this, and you know, I'm gonna use the same red. We're gonna use the same Lucas red and do the same exact thing that we did right here. All right, we are now working with a wet brush on a wet surface. So you are never going to get crispy edges with that, ever. Just because that water is going to move and the pigment is going to follow the path of water, and because it's already wet, it's just gonna go wee, and that's just kind of how it's going to happen when you work wet on wet. So when that is the case for painting, it can be used to your advantage. So let me get this whole flower wet so that we can have it work for us. Try and stay within my lines. I'm not exactly being very precise, but that's okay. You get the idea. All right, so now my whole flower is wet. I'm gonna let that sit for just a second. So if I wanted to try and get a soft edge to a color, like say I'm working with a shadow, and I don't want a hard edge on my shadow, or if I want that color to just kind of sort of start from the center and get nice and soft on the way out, this is a really lovely way of doing that. Again, I'm going to use a slightly different brush. This is that cat's tongue, just in a smaller size. So if I'm working wet on wet, I'm not going to get a hard edge. So I can work with that and just kind of give sort of details, but not make it perfect. And then it will start to sort of bloom out, and then I can use my other techniques over top of it, which we're about to get into, which I'm very excited about. So that is wet on wet, and you can use it for shadows, you can use it for all kinds of things. So like, even though now it's still wet, I can still work into that. Let me use a little bit of this purple. Like say I had a shadow over here, shadow over here. I'm still working wet and wet, right? And as long as it is wet, you're working wet on wet, and you're never going to get a hard edge. So the reason why I left this, and I wanted to just make sure, okay. Actually, I can probably still use this brush. When it comes to the wet on dry, because this is, it evaporates pretty fast. Like this is already dry. You can use that also to your advantage. And now have sort of variation in shapes. And again, you can start getting the different petals and get them slightly have variation to them. So that way it adds depth, and you can have some be darker, some be lighter. But that's a way of doing wet on dry, where if you let your section dry that you've already worked on, then you can go back in and work on it again. So we have dry brushing. All right. Oh, what color do I want to use now? I love all these colors. They're so fun. I want to use a yellow this time. Let's use a yellow. Dry brushing, and actually, back over here to the squares. Boring square first. Let me use a square brush. There we go. I feel like this works best with this. Dry brushing, honestly, I like it better on the cold press paper than I do the hot press, because cold press has more texture. This is kind of tying perfectly into your guys' question, so I'm really glad you guys asked. And actually, you know what, let me get a slightly darker yellow, because I just realized this is probably not going to register too well, white on yellow. Let me work a little darker here. Okay, so we got a permanent yellow deep, and so I have a lot of watercolor on my brush, and my brush is pretty wet. I'm going to take that and just kind of tap it into my brush, and I can see the water absorbing out of my brush, right? I don't want a sopping wet brush. This is never going to work for this. So I'm going to take it and I'm going to just lightly drag it across the side of my paper. And actually, if you guys want to go to that side camera, this might be easier to see. You want to zoom in a little bit more? There we go. Okay, so if I take that, and I can see that there's a bit of a curve to my brush, and I don't want that. I just drag it across the top, just so I'm hitting that texture of the paper. And so I'm getting a really scratchy kind of texture to it. And you can really see that cold press texture coming out, which is why I really love dry brushing for this paper. Now, when it comes to dry brushing in a shape, again, this is a little bit harder. So let's use that same color. If I take this, and I'm going to actually turn it on its side, so I can use the edge of my brush and kind of flick it out. Remember, this is also a hot press, so its texture is different. And it's a lot smoother, but it still has texture to it, obviously. So then I can take that and I can just work on every little petal and work on it that way. Kind of give some variation. And I'm over here just dabbing just the little tiny dots of watercolor that I have on my palette. So I'm not picking up a whole lot of paint every time I do this. And if I notice my brush is a little wet, again, you can still have that scrap piece of paper just to test to see how much you have on your brush. You very easily could dab it on your paper towel and then work that way and kind of get a little bit of it off. Now what's cool is that you could also layer dry brushing. So let me grab a little bit of this Lucas red. Again, I think I have too much water on my brush. There we go. And then I can take that, dry brush again, because for the most part, I'm not adding a whole lot of anything on my paper right now, so it dries really fast. So it's not taking a whole lot of time to dry. But there you go. Really fun. Adds a really fun texture to it. All right, now glazing. We're gonna go back to square first. This one is fairly simple, and as you can see, I have a flat wash already on my my square here. Because glazing is taking a color and just very simply layering it on top of the other one. That's the easiest way I can explain it. So if I have this, I believe this is the turquoise actually, and then if I take, say, let's go lemon yellow. I was going to use lemon yellow before, but now I can just use lemon yellow. So if I take that lemon yellow over this turquoisey blue, I'm not brushing the dickens out of it. I'm just trying to lay, again, another like almost flat wash on there. But you can see what I had underneath it, and you can see the yellow overlapping, so you can know it's yellow, but now I've made green. So it is optically mixing more or less, but it's in a way where we are now layering these transparent colors over top of each other, right? It's very simplistic, very useful technique as far as like trying to build layers in your watercolor, and I use that a lot, to be honest. So in a shape, let's see, what color should I glaze on top of this? Are we gonna go shadows or light? Do what? How? Light? We're gonna do light? Okay. So light in general tends to be on the warmer side. So like the sunshine is a nice yellow. So I'm gonna keep with that lemon yellow, and we can layer some light on here. You know what, I'll do both. I'll do shadows and light. How about that? So let's say I have light coming over here, and it's hitting the top of my flower, and maybe a little bit right here, and just the edge of that one. Then it's coming down and getting that. So it's just adding a little subtle difference, which is quite lovely. Let's see, there's a lot of light on this one. So I'm pretending like the light's kind of coming that direction. So this is catching a lot of light. Right? And then the last petal feels like it's coming up and out. So light would just be on the edge, just a little. Right? So there's the light. Then we'll add shadow, which tends to be pretty cool if your lights are warm. So we're gonna stick with this purple that I already have over here. That actually we're gonna add the purple and the dioxazine violet. If anybody knows, that's a word I struggle with. I don't know why I can't say that word sometimes, but I have to hear Katie say it in my head before I can say it. Okay, so my shadows are going to be a little bit on the cooler side. So we're going to have the edge of this one be in shadow, and then this one is going to be tucked under just a little bit. Almost like it's folding, that edge is folding over just a little. And then we're going to do the same thing for this, where that edge just starts to curl over just a little. And this is also going to be about the same. So just by adding 2 glazes of colors, now they are pretty graphically done. I have very hard edges because I'm working wet on dry, because this is all fully dry, and I didn't have any of that overlap. So those edges are pretty hard, but you can see just by adding 2 glazes of a color on top of what I have existing, it's now creating form. Now, if you are interested in having those edges be a little softer, you can take a clean brush and just run it over the edges while they're still pretty wet, like right after you put them down, and it'll soften it just a bit, which is a really lovely way of doing that. But we'll do that in the painting at the end. So, charging. Let's work on the square first so we can kind of see the basic idea. So charging, I'm going to probably clean off my palette here, get some new colors. Let's use some greens. I think greens are fun. Okay, so charging is where you take a color, and we're gonna use, let's use this Verona Green Earth. This is a really fun color. I feel like I don't use that often enough, right? Make my little puddle here. Test to see how, okay, that's good. All right, so charging is where you have, say, watercolor you're laying down, and then you decide, this is actually something you've seen me do already in, whether you have like a radiated wash or anything, this is something you saw me do a little earlier. And I decided that I needed some more pigment. You can also just kind of dab in that pigment. Let me actually get a little bit more water on here. This is me charging it with pigment. Now, areas where it's wetter, because this is why I did this. This is drier. It is still wet, but you can see kind of on the right-hand side, it's wetter. So if it's starting to dry and you charge it, you're gonna get these almost like sort of soft little blobs, kind of like when I did the wet on wet. But if it's still really wet and you charge it, it's going to disperse it and kind of make it nice and soft. Now, also one thing you can do is tip it and kind of soften those edges as well, which is really lovely way of kind of getting that gradation as well. It's just not exactly perfect, but when you need a gradiated wash that's perfect, usually for me, it's always in swatches. So I don't use a perfect graded wash most of the time. It's usually got some variation to it. So with charging on a flower, you know, I want to keep using that, that Verona Green Earth. We're gonna have a green flower. I feel like it feels right. Also, this happens to be a granulating color, naturally granulating. It's just a pigment, and when I say granulating, what that means is that pigment, and I'll show you on the cold press, because this is a really great way of cold press versus hot press. Granulating colors have like a really heavy pigment, and so they just want to kind of dig into the surface of your paper. So the water will float some of the pigment off a little bit, and then it'll have like these, like the pigment will gather in like the nooks and crannies. So when it comes to the cold press, you have deeper texture. So it wants to kind of pull it into those little sections, whereas like hot press is quite untextured. So it doesn't quite do the same thing, but it's a granulating color, so it's going to do it to some effect, right? So I'm going to actually make this a lot lighter. I'm going to try and get this whole thing nice and wet and try and kind of almost like a flat wash at first and not have anything dry on me because I want this whole thing to be quite wet. Okay. Now I'm going to grab some more of that pigment, and I'm going to need more water, and I'm going to charge just the center of that flower. Now with this one, yes, you can sort of control it to an extent. It's a lot harder because it's just going to take practice, but this is kind of one of those techniques where I'm just like, take the wheel and kind of let it go, you know, and whatever you get, which is really fun. And I actually kind of want to pull up some of this pigment just on the edge, or at least some of the water, just so that pigment will stay kind of right in the middle, which is really fun. But I like to just, this is my like, it does whatever it wants to technique, which is really fun. But yes, you can get to the point where you control it. It just takes a lot of practice. Now, it's almost dry, but you can start to see that granulating color here. You see how it kind of just wants to like sort of, it feels like almost like a dirt where it kind of gets like that pigment kind of granulation, and it wants to stick into kind of the texture of the paper. Whereas this one, it's still drying, but you can see it still has that like sort of gritty feel, but it doesn't have that like texture to really stick into. So that's the difference. But cold press versus hot press. That's why it's so personal preference on whether or not you want a nice smooth super flat look or if you want something with texture. I feel like that's most of the time it kind of comes down to that. But everyone in the comments, please tell me whether or not you are a cold press or a hot press person. Like, I'm curious as to how we're split, because I go back and forth, but for illustrations, I love hot press. For fun, painterly things, I like cold press. But I'm curious as to what all of you like. All right, so do we have a question?
Yeah. Okay, so William was wondering, it doesn't have to be at this exact moment, you might want to think about it.
Okay.
But he said, will you cover building a watercolor set and talking about which basic colors you'll want to have?
I wasn't gonna go over that.
That's what I said.
Yeah, but I will say, like, Lucas has a lovely basic set with the set of 12. They have two different versions. They have their studio version, which is student, like a lower quality grade. I say lower quality, but it's still a lovely paint. It's like a student grade. It's something where you would love to like practice with or do underpaintings with and then work with the nicer pigments on top. But their Aquarelle 1862, which is what I'm working with, is their professional line. So the pigmentation is really high in the pans. The colors are wonderful. Sometimes you'll get colors in here that you can't get in the student grade. But as far as a basic set of like 12, they have a really wonderful standard set. Even their 48, like if you want to get into the higher levels, this is a really lovely set. Now, beyond the colors you have in here, I do feel like it gets into personal preference and kind of what you're painting, because that's going to vary. If you're painting portraiture, you're not going to want the same colors as somebody who's painting landscapes. So that's really going to depend on you, but a really great question. I do love that, but I wasn't going to go over building basic sets.
Wait, I just remembered that Michaelia did a show on building your perfect watercolor palette, so
yeah.
I'll link it in the comments.
I love that, yeah. So we have a ton of the Jerry's live shows from our previous kind of setup before. They're shorter kind of format shows, so if you are interested in that, we have a ton of watercolor shows. Our JerrysArtarama YouTube channel definitely has so many things watercolor, so if you're interested in more things, it's a really great resource for you guys to reach out, and you can always ask questions on those too. We will find them. We always check it. Okay, so dragging and pulling. This is a really fun technique that I like to use. Two brushes. I'm still going to use both of them right-handed because I don't trust myself, although I can paint left-handed. Did that. But it's a really fun technique that is something I don't use very often. Mostly because I always forget that it's a technique, but that like I can use, but it's still a blast to use. So I'm gonna have my puddle of, we're gonna use phthalo blue and a really wet brush. I'm gonna actually just leave that in the water for a second. So dragging and pulling, I've heard it called both things, is one of those really fun techniques, which actually, you know what, I take that back. I'm going to use phthalo and let's go raw umber, because I've seen a painting similar to this and it was very satisfying to watch. Okay, so I'm going to use this just to kind of dab in a lot of pigment and have it be quite loaded, just kind of in like a fun line. Boop. And I splattered myself and the whole table. Cool. Hopefully I didn't get the camera. Sorry, just over here making a mess. All right, and then I'm going to take my phthalo blue just for a variation in color. Right? And then I'm going to take my clean water, which is hopefully still clean after I splattered everything, and I'm going to get it wet, and then I'm going to just pull it across that and let it kind of do whatever it does. Now, I put it right in the middle because you could very easily do the same thing on the bottom. I want to get that wet, but it's going to be a lot less because most of the pigment already went up. If I had moved a little faster, that might have been a little bit more satisfying. But this is a really fun technique where you can get kind of crazy variations and you can use all kinds of different colors and get that just burst of color going straight up. Because again, pigment and water, when it comes to watercolor, it's going to take the path of wet wants to go into wet. So you're essentially acting as like a magnet with that, which is really fun. This is actually a really fun technique that is great for liquid watercolors. We have liquid watercolors. It's not in the teacher's card, I can tell you that right now, because I didn't even think about that. But if you lay down a line of, because it has like the squeezy bottles, which are really fun, and you pipe out a line of really fun colors, and then you use like, say like a mop brush, which I'll get into in a second, and use this and like soak your paper and then just drag it across, that whole thing's gonna just flood with color and you can work really big and that would be really fun. I would love to see people do this. This is why I like creating things. Love art. But it's really fun, and again, this is also one of those ones where it's like, you kind of have to let it do whatever it's doing, because the more you brush and the more you fiddle with it, you're going to start overworking it. And this is a technique that does work really well with kind of like accidents, and the water moves in whatever way that the water is going to move. Now, I haven't quite figured out how I'm going to do that with this, because I was like, I don't know how to make a flower with this technique. But we're gonna give it a whirl. We're gonna use alizarin crimson, and we're gonna use a good amount of pigment on this. And we're gonna do the opposite of what we've been doing. We're gonna pull it from the outside in. How about that? And I need another brush that's just wet. Okay. So let me get my alizarin crimson. All right, and then we're gonna just kind of put it on the edges. And I think this is gonna be something where I'm gonna have to do each petal individually, because I don't think I'm gonna have enough time to, really get the whole thing kind of, yeah, like it's not even all that wet right now, and it's not quite working. Okay, so failure number one, that's okay. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4 more petals. 4 more petals to mess up on. It's okay. So let's do that again, and this time we're gonna get a lot of pigment and a lot of water, because I forgot that part. And I have it nice and soaking wet. Okay. We're gonna go from wet into there. Let it do whatever it does. There we go. That's what I was looking for. Yeah. So that would be a really fun technique for flowers because you'll get a really fun like variation. It always depends on how much water you use, because you can see I definitely did not apply enough of that pigment. Like it started drying. That's why I have that weird line. But this is a really lovely way of doing that. Now, I use a lot of water and that's why the whole thing just completely filled in. But this is a fun thing to experiment with and try and see how much water you want to use and how much pigment you want to use and whether or not it's really saturated and how much you can kind of adjust those variables and see how it works. Now I'm going to not do any more petals because I feel like it's just going to get to be a muddy mess. If I were doing this whole flower like this, I would let that fully dry and approach each petal individually, you know? I feel like that's the cleanest way of getting that to kind of work. Because again, you are working with water just kind of zooming into another section. So if this is fully wet, it's not going to exactly work great. All right, so we have a couple more techniques, and then I think we're going to take a break after I finish these. But onward to blooming. I need a bigger brush. We're going to do this one. Okay, so with blooming, and I'm going to actually take these two and mix them together because that'll make me a nice purple. With blooming, this is something that happens to a lot of people on accident, and they don't know why. And they want to know how to control it because they also want to know how to not do it. So blooming happens when you lay down a nice, beautiful color, and then you start adding more. And if it gets to this point, sorry, that started running off the page. If it gets to a point where it starts to dry and you add more water, or if you add even more of this color, and you know what, I'm going to add a little bit more of this raw umber to it, right? Change it up a little bit. So you can see it's already starting to bloom. If I do that on a drier section, it's going to do it even more. And you can start to see it's already reacting. It's because you are now pushing your water, like more water into a drier section. So that water wants to spread out because it's trying to self-level itself, essentially. Self-level itself. Yes, I said that. It's just trying to self-level because that's what water does. It takes the path of least resistance and it's on a flat piece of paper, so it's trying to just spread out. Now, because it is working with pigment, you are now pushing that pigment further away. And that's what happens with blooming. Now, this is really fun if you use it intentionally. It's really frustrating when you don't. But this is why it's happening. So if that's something that is something you want to play with, it's a really fun thing to do. But if it's something that is happening to you in your watercolors, that's why. And so if you get to a point where you're brushing down color and you're trying to either charge it with water or you're charging it with color, like I was doing here, and it's just getting this weird bloom that you don't like, I usually try and like smooth it out with my brush. Let me see if I can try and save this a little. You can sort of smooth it out a little bit with your brush and work it to where you can get that gradation. But what you need to do is pick up the water. You need to remove that water and kind of pull it up to where it's going to stop spreading out like that. Now, I still might not have pulled up enough, and there's only so much you're going to be able to do because this section is still drier than this. So there's a potential for that bloom to still kind of move in and have that weird variation, which I think is kind of fun. But if that's something that's not intentional, again, can be very frustrating. But that is why it's working. All right, so let's try this in a flower intentionally. So I'm gonna actually use that same kind of color. What do I have? Alizarin Crimson mixed with phthalo and raw umber. That was a really fun color combination. I like that. Phthalo blue. There's my phthalo. Okay, so alizarin crimson and phthalo make a really fun purple, and then you add a little bit of raw umber to the mix, and it makes it a little bit more naturalistic, which is cute. All right, so we're gonna try and do some blooms here. Again, I'm not being really precise with this. That's okay. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna be very unprecise with this. because I have a plan that I forgot about until just now. All right, so we're gonna get some water. Just kind of dab it in wherever, just for variation. And then we're gonna let that kind of spread itself out. And actually, I'm going to pick up some of this water with my brush. Dry brush will pick up water from your paper. Again, that's why I always have a rag in my hand whenever I'm painting. It's all about controlling water. Now I need to let that dry a little bit before I try to bloom more again, because remember, if it starts getting dry and you add more, that's when it really happens. All right, I think we're getting close. You know what, I'm gonna be a little impatient and I'm just gonna dab it a little bit. Okay, there we go. That might have been too much, but that's okay. All right, so we're gonna let that be. It's gonna be very mottled and textury, which is fun. And then we're gonna come back to that, but you guys understand, bloom. That's exactly what it's doing. So, sgraffito, that's how you say that word, sgraffito. Essentially, the idea is that you're scratching into the surface. It does go back to like the Italian masters that were scratching into plaster surfaces and literally kind of creating this relief technique, which is really, really fun. But when it comes to watercolor, there are some rules that you have to adhere by in order to get sgraffito to work. And boy, did I have to figure that out. It took me a while because I was trying to just scratch the paper and then paint on it. That does not work. It really does not work at all. So what you have to do, and I'm going to use this amazing green yellow, which is lovely. What you have to do is get it wet first. So I'm going to pretend like this is a lovely patch of grass on like a sandy dune. We're going to use a little bit of this olive green too. Why not? Because I want it to be a little bit darker. Actually, you know what? I'm going to add a little Payne's gray to this. Kind of really get it to darken up. And then mixing in with that green yellow will give me a funky green, which is lovely. Love it. All right, so you have to get it wet first, right? We're going for sort of grassy. Then you're gonna take a tool. This is why I love these pencils, because it's got a metal tip. Then the other thing that you can use are just anything around you, whether it be like the back of a pointy brush, or you have some scissors. And while it's wet, you have to let it sit for just a second. Let me get some more of that pigment down as well. While it's wet and it's starting to absorb and affect the fibers of the paper, then you scratch into it. So by doing that, you can even use some scissors for some variation. Ooh, don't go too deep because you'll do what I just did and I tore my paper a little bit. Lighter with the scissors, Emmy, lighter with the scissors. That's okay. But it gives you some variation, and if you dig into it, then you're really going to hurt your paper. Essentially, here, I was gonna pull that up. Here we go. Wherever you scratch into your paper, that pigment is gonna pool. And because you're disrupting the surface of your paper with the water, and it's making the fibers of that paper softer, you're going to be able to kind of scratch in and have it actually stay permanent. That's why if you scratch it before you paint on it, it will go away, because all the fibers that you just scratched into like a dent are going to start absorbing that paper, or absorbing the water and the pigment, and start to pop back up. So when you absorb the paper or absorb the water into the paper and then you scratch it, you're permanently disrupting it and it's going to stay like that. So this is a really great technique for if you're adding fur, if you're adding grass, there's all kinds of things that you can use this for. For me, I'm going to try and use it for the center of my flower. I figured that would be a really fun, cute little way of doing that. I'm going to try probably use the tip of my pencil here. And just so you do know, I put the lead fully in, like it's not out at all. This is just the metal tip. There's no lead out at all. So I'm just using the metal tip of that. All right, that is a very large brush, and that is not going to work very well for this. Let me get a smaller brush here. Let's go orange. We have not done orange yet. Okay, so again, we're gonna try and get a little variation because it brings me joy. But we're gonna start to get the center of this saturated first and foremost, because I need that paper to start absorbing this water. So I'm gonna actually, whilst that's doing the thing, get a couple different colors, just work it in. Well, that didn't have much of a variation at all, did it? But we're gonna add way more orange to the center of that flower. And then I'm gonna add a little bit of, let's do this beautiful yellow, just to the edge. And the way I'm getting that the soft edges here is that I'm trying to make sure that my edges are not dry. If they are dry, they're starting to give me a crispy edge. Like I was worried about this one. That's okay. It's all right. So the center of that flower now should be pretty absorbed, but I think the orange is going to be a little on the light side. So let me get something a little darker so that we can really see those scratches. And I'm going to charge it with this red, which I think is very pretty. Because everything else is nice and wet, it's going to soften outward. But if it's starting to get to a part where I don't want it to go fully in, I can take a dry brush that's clean and start to pull that. But I'm going to also do my sgraffito. And then I'm going to also pull in some lines for this flower. There we go. And now I have this really lovely, like, sharp lines. Let me actually pull it up so you guys can see. There you go. You can see that sharp little detail line, and I didn't paint that. I just drug that through with the metal tip of my pencil, which is why I really love that as a tool, because it does give me really fine lines without having to paint them. Painting fine lines with watercolor is kind of my nightmare. It's I don't have the patience for it, and I don't have that steady of a hand. So whether or not you want to call this cheating, I don't care. It is using your tools and using your noggin, working smarter, not harder. All right, so the next one is fun because it's a mess, and I'm a mess. That's kind of where I live. So with this one, splatters, it's kind of usually what I do when it comes to, actually, I don't think I need to show you on this. It's the same technique. This is usually what I do when I do illustrations, and I'm like, it's really flat and it doesn't feel like it has much like pizzazz to it. So I will start adding just a little splatter here and there. And when it comes to adding splatters, the more saturated you have your brush, actually, you know what? I am going to show you on this. And this one, I'm going to try and get a darker, let me actually use black because I feel like that's going to be really visible for you guys. All right, so this is a very saturated, very wet, very pigmented brush right now, right? Like it is soaking wet. The more water and pigment that you have on your brush, the more splatters you're going to get. The drier your brush is, the more fine and like tiny little splatters that you're going to get. But like if you use a larger brush, you're gonna get even bigger splatters, obviously. This one you can go this way or that way. And problem with splatters is that it goes everywhere. It's not really controllable unless you have something called masking fluid, which is we're gonna go over next. But that way, you guys can see splatters. It adds a little something extra, a little fun. Now, if you are trying to also control it, one way of controlling it would be to block off your paper as well as masking fluid. That's what masking fluid does. It just keeps you from having to like cut paper, but let's say. So it's very saturated. So I'm getting big splatters. And I'm not flicking this very hard, mostly because the harder you flick your brush, the further it goes. But you can see I also just got a nice little section where I have splatters that have almost a sort of hard edge, but it doesn't quite. But it's a really, really fun little technique. So I added a little bit of splatters to my flower, and I think it adds just a little bit more personality than having just like a cute flower. Like it has a little something extra, just in my brain. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's just me. Anybody else out there agree? Because I feel like splatters are fun. I feel like there's also the people out there that'll be like, I got it everywhere. I got it everywhere, and they're kind of freaking out, you know. Are you a mess or are you not a mess? Which is crazy because I'm usually a very clean painter. All right, so lifting and masking fluid. This is our last square here. And it's one of those things where I wanted to show you a couple different ways of lifting, because lifting can help you save an oopsie. If you put in too much paint, or it's gotten too dark, or you have something where a color starts bleeding into something else and you want to lift it real fast, it's a really lovely thing to do. So say I left, you know, I'm going to actually put this all the way across because I need to show you the masking fluid too. If you say you didn't mean to color that in fully, taking a rag or something and just blotting it will lift up some of that pigment. Now, some colors stain worse than others just because they are a very strong color and there's not a whole lot you can do. But even with things that have been dry for a while, like this flat wash right here, if I take this is just a clean wet brush, and I put down water and I let it sit there for a second and then I dab it up with my rag, it's definitely going to lift up some of that pigment and kind of lighten it. So whether or not you're doing it immediately or over time, it is something that you can do to kind of help fix things. And with that, I also sometimes use a paper towel. I just want to let it really soak in, because if you, yeah, that one's really stained. It was also very light. It also depends on your paper as well. So I do find that, like, I want to say the 25% cotton, I feel like those lift a little bit better because the 100% cotton is so absorbent that it really doesn't want to pick up other things. Let me try and do it over here again. Now, as you can also see, there are some areas that just didn't get painted. That is masking fluid. And I will show you how to apply that in a minute. Yeah, you can see this is starting to work. So this one just was too stained and too far gone. Whereas like this one, yeah, I was able to lift the pigment again. So masking fluid, I added it to the cart kind of last minute because I almost forgot. But this is, it comes with a pack of 10 brushes that are the round as well as a flat that's maybe like 1/4 of an inch. These are really lovely as far as like preserving your whites. And this is one that I've used a couple of times, so ignore the fact that the lid's a little dirty. It's well loved. So this can happen. It's okay. It's not bad or anything. it's just the dry masking fluid kind of sticking to the lid and happening. You can pull it out of there if you want to. But this is what it looks like, excuse it, on the barrel there. This is essentially just liquid latex, liquid rubber. So you can apply it to the paper. You really don't need a very thick layer. I'm just gonna put this down over here and keep the lid on your masking fluid. You don't want it to dry out. So I just applied 3 little stripes here. This one's pretty, it's like almost like a dry brush, but it's really thin, and that's enough. You really don't need a whole lot of masking fluid. Like I had a really thick dot over here and it took forever to dry, but you really don't need that much. As soon as you paint it on your surface, it's going to completely repel any and all watercolor no matter what you do until you remove it. So the trick with masking fluid, you have to apply it to dry paper. You have to wait for it to fully dry before you paint over it. Once you fully paint over it, you cannot remove it until your paper is fully dry. Always make sure it's dry. Dry is the key to masking fluid. The other thing to note about masking fluid is that the reason why I put this specific kit in that had the little disposable brushes is because it will destroy your brushes. There is a trick with like dipping it in, what do they say, like dish soap, and then using it will kind of save your brushes. But like this is the one I used earlier, and like it's not going to come out of there. That is in there forever. You can pick at this if you really want to, but you will spend a very long time and then have maybe a working brush-ish at the end. So that's why I suggest when you're using masking fluid, you either use brushes you don't care for, use cheaper brushes, things that you will not be mad about throwing away because they will be destroyed. But they're really lovely, and as far as like the round brush comes to a really nice fine point, the flat brush, which is like 1/4 of an inch, is really lovely for painting larger sections. But this is what's going to happen is that everywhere where you paint it, nothing is going to touch that paper. Now you can see some of it's a little yellow because as it dries, it gets a little bit more yellow. So now that this is fully dry, I can remove it with what this is. It is not something, it kind of looks like it should be like thrown away. It looks gross. This is called a rubber cement pickup. Now this one, you literally, it's kind of fun. You can just like tap the corner of the masking fluid and it will start sticking to this and removing from your paper. So wherever you had that masking fluid, it will now stick to your rubber cement pickup and create essentially a little latex booger. There is no other word I found that is more appropriate for that. But it will absolutely stick, and then you can just rip it right off of there and throw it away. But now everywhere where I had my masking fluid, it is now pure white. And you can always just touch your paper to make sure you removed everything. Yeah, there we go. So now all of that is still pure white. So if you need to save your whites, this is a really lovely way of doing it. It's also, I will say, if you do have a latex allergy, I believe Pabio has one that is latex free in case that is something that you are worried about. But if you're not someone who has latex allergy, this is a lovely, lovely brand. But that's exactly what it does. And it is a really wonderful, wonderful tool. Now, we're going to use it on a flower. I was going to use lifting on this flower, but I haven't had any plans for that yet. Hold on. Let's see. We're going to, what color should we do?
Magenta.
Magenta?
Nobody
Ooh.
else is answering today.
Katie is the only one.
Looking something up.
That's valid. Okay, so I'm just going to go in with this lovely magenta. And I'm going to also just, you know what? No, I was going to overpaint it, but I'm going to just stick with the flower. So I've already painted in my masking fluid. I've tried to sort of think of where the light would be hitting my flower, and then I just am kind of painting the entire thing. I can do some variations, like say I want to add a little like darkness in the middle there. I can charge it with some of this blue that I still have on my palette and let that dry. And then if I decide that I want the tips of my petals to be lighter while I have it still wet on my paper, again, this is that lifting part, I'm going to use my dry, clean paintbrush or a paper towel just to lift some of that pigment up on the edges and get it just a little lighter. I'm trying to move fast because this is drying. And I also definitely overpainted it a little bit over there. That's okay. It was meant to be. And a little bit over here. Okay. So lifting just a little bit of those pigments up off the edge of that petal, just to give it some more variation. I think it's cute. All right, and then yes, I cannot take the masking fluid off until it dries fully. So that was all of our techniques. I do have a couple of more, like, you know what, actually before we do go on break, I do have one thing that I wanted to show you guys. Where did it go? And I almost forgot because I had my blooming over here that reminded me. I wanted to show you a couple different things that you can add as far as when it comes to these techniques. I'm trying to get this masking fluid out of the way. And one of them is pens. So if you do like overpaint, this is what I was planning, the overpainting of say something like this and you wanted that blooming where you get that really fun texture, you can then take something like this, which is a waterproof technical pen. It's essentially just a nice bullet nib, and you can then, when your paper is dry, dry is key, you can then draw these really cute outlines. And I'm being really fast here. Oh, I forgot there's a little fold here. Whee! And then I can draw a couple little things and a couple little dots. And there we go. I have a cute little illustration that is got a really fun background. Now, say I want to take it a step further and I want to add more paint to this. I can use watercolor, but again, then I'd be doing glazing or you know, trying to apply other colors on top of this. And this is a really dark, kind of muddy color as it is. So instead of going with watercolor, what I will probably go with is gouache. Now, the difference between gouache and watercolor is that gouache is opaque. So while watercolor has all the transparency, gouache has opacity. So when it comes to that, I can then take something, say like this turquoise blue, and maybe a little bit of the white. Now these come in tubes, so you will need like a palette for this. Because panning gouache, because you technically could put gouache in a pan and it will reactivate just the same, it's kind of brittle and it doesn't pan very nicely. It tends to crack and kind of break off and becomes a bit of a pain. So I like using porcelain palettes in general when it comes to that, just so I'm not fighting little cracked pieces of gouache. But I could use, say, something like the turquoise blue and then this white, and then create a fun background. All right, and then the lid of this also turns into a palette, which I love. Where is this? Okay, here we go. Take this, take a little bit of this turquoise blue, a little bit of this white, because I want opacity. I want to kind of obliterate some of the things I've already done. And by taking that, I can then carve around my flower and just kind of remove that background a little bit. And if I didn't have as much water as I do right now on my brush, it would even be more opaque, though it's pretty opaque. Now, if you do end up doing this with the lines, because what I've done before, which is really fun, is I've also taken this and I've done really messy line work, because like sometimes it is a vibe when you're just drawing something from life, or you know, are doing like a blind contour drawing or something like that. Then you can take this and kind of remove some of those lines. You can also then draw on top of this gouache, which is really fun, and it dries nice and like flat and matte, so it's really lovely as far as like a juxtaposition with everything being so shiny all the time. I'm a big fan of like flat matte illustrations, but it's just a fun little way of adjusting your painting. But now it went from just this big purpley gray blob to a really fun little flower, and that is gouache. So I like to use gouache on top of my watercolors. Yes, you can technically go the other way around, but remember, gouache is opaque, watercolor is transparent. That is the biggest difference. Now, always keep in mind, there are such a things called acrylic gouache, which is not the same thing. That acts more like an acrylic. This is a traditional gouache, so it's going to act like watercolor. And that's what I'm talking about when in this particular show. So now that I've done that, this should be dry, and I can take off my, yay, the little highlights from my flower and remove all of them. And then this guy will be done. Oop. Try and keep most of the little masking fluid goobers off of this, because it just kind of tends to like stick back down onto the paper. So if I pick it up and it removes itself, I get it off of there. And I'm shaking the whole table, sorry. All right, let's get the center of this. Now, if you try and remove masking fluid with a paper that's still wet, you will tear your paper. That is very, very upsetting. So don't do that. I have definitely done it before because I was just in a rush. But there we go. I have my highlights are still preserved. I have the little dots in the center of my flower, and it is all done. So that was our techniques, guys. And then we're gonna take a quick break. I believe about 5 minutes, right? Yeah, 5 minutes. You'll see the timer. And then I'm gonna go get some water. And when we come back, we will do a watercolor together using all these techniques. So I will see you in 5 minutes. Hey everybody, welcome back. Thank you for the 5-minute break. Okay, so now we are going to work on a watercolor using all of our different techniques. And actually, let me pull this back up, not that one, this one. So I can have the techniques next to me and I can keep them in mind. Always a good thing to have them as a reference and just practice in general. So we are going to be painting this image. And also, I forgot to tell you guys, this was the image that I was basing my flowers off of. If you find beautiful flowers around, because it's springtime, I'm so excited for warmth. Honestly, it's been a rough winter. But if you see flowers around your neighborhood, or you can also go to royalty-free websites and find images that are really lovely. I love finding images of flowers. But what I usually do, and this is what I did actually for this one, you just kind of, maybe we go to the overhead so you can see this. Okay, there we go. Instead of taking just the picture, because the flowers are so light, it's easier for you to see what's happening if you just take one of the drawing pens and just tracing the edges so you can see the shape, because otherwise it gets a little confusing just looking at it sometimes, just because the flowers are overlapping, and I just wanted one single flower image kind of shape to work off of. So this is what I was working off of for the techniques portion of that. But this is what we're going to be painting. Now, this was a really lovely image. I believe this is in California. I can't remember off the top of my head where this was. If anybody knows what this is, put it in the chats, because I can't remember. I'm pretty sure it says on the royalty-free website where I got this. So if you are interested in painting this image, or if you're painting along with me right now, Amanda should be able to put that link in the chat as well for both of the images. But this was the kind of run through when I was testing this image. And so I'm going to try and remember all the colors that I used for this. But odds are it's going to look a little different, and that's okay, because every painting is a little different from the next. But I'm going to probably keep both of those side by side in tandem as well. But we're going to be working off of this. Now, if you do go ahead and download that image from the royalty-free website, you're going to see it a lot better than what you can on here, because this is a printout, so it's darker. And then you're also getting a glare sometimes. So I'm not going to worry about keeping that on site for you guys to see. But if you are interested, go ahead and just download it, because you're going to see a lot better of an image quality that way. Now, I do know, I was informed while we were on break, we had a question about brushes. And I loved the question. It was about whether or not you can use the same brushes for gouache and your watercolors. So yes, you can. The thing is, standard gouache, where it does reactivate and works just like watercolor, yes. Acrylic gouache is where it gets a little iffy. You don't really want to mix your acrylic brushes with your watercolors and vice versa, just because that acrylic polymer really changes the bristle of your brush, and it doesn't work really great with watercolor. Now, have I mixed them before in my own practice when I was in college? Yeah, I did. It wasn't the end of the world. It's just a good brush practice to keep your acrylic brushes for acrylics and your watercolor brushes for for watercolor specifically. But if you only have one set of brushes and you want to try one or the other, I get it. I'm not ever going to harass you on that one. So first things first, when it comes to a landscape, I like to work from the background forward. It just is a layering thing for me to kind of work from the furthest thing up. And when it comes to this image, it's really hard to see. I guess it actually is picking it up on camera a little bit more. There's a darker blue-ish, and it fades to almost white. So that's what I'm going to do, and that is a graded wash. Now, if you are working on a little 8x8 like me, the brushes that I have in the teacher's cart should be fine. These, the Borciani and Bonazzi. I'm trying to say that better. But those are great. But if you are working larger, This is why I had a mop brush over here. So mop brushes, this is on the smaller side. They also come bigger. These are great when you are trying to do washes, and whether it's a flat wash or a graded wash, and it is a large surface area. This holds a lot of water, this holds a lot of pigment. This will get that whole surface area without running out of water or pigment in a brush. So if you're working in a large surface area and you're having that issue, that is definitely something to be mindful of, is using the brush that is right for that space. So I'm using my largest flat brush, and I'm going to probably use, I have no idea what color I used. Let's do ultramarine blue deep. I love that color for sky. It's a little bit on the like purplier side for blues, whereas like say like a cyan leans a little bit more towards green. I think for this image it makes me very happy as far as like the juxtaposition of this versus and I'm not using a whole lot of pigment at all, but I am going to charge a little bit more of the corners and kind of drag in more of that pigment, and then I'm going to start using more and more water as I go down to my horizon. Now, since I'm going down to just pure water, I can actually overpaint that a little bit because it's, you know, clear, and I'm not going to have a problem with that. But then I have to remember, if I'm trying to paint the next kind of area, I need to be cognizant that it is wet. So I'm not going to get a harsh line, you know, when it comes to the two areas. So as long as I'm aware of that, then we're good. Now, do we have a question?
We do. William was wondering if you could go over real quick if you freehanded that onto the block or if you traced it somehow.
I love that question. I traced it. Just because I'm working with such a specific image, and because like I can freehand this onto the paper and get it pretty accurately, but due to the fact that we are on a time limit with our show, I did just trace this just because I just wanted the image to be there and not have to guess it to where things are and then have to be correcting my image later on, because that sometimes happens too. You know, it's part of the artistic process. But because this is a class and I'm just trying to get those techniques down and within a timeline, we traced. Now, if you are interested in what I traced with, I just printed out a separate one of these, and then I actually used is it Jacquard tracing paper, I believe. They are, I don't use the Seural because I have a hard time erasing that, and also the gray is a little on the light side for me, especially because we're on camera here. I need you guys to be able to see this. So if I were doing this in my own practice and trying to just do this image, I think I just touched my, okay, no, sorry. I did put masking fluid down here. Side note, I just touched it and I was like, oh no, did I smear it? We're good. But yeah, so because we are on camera, I wanted my lines to be a little darker. If I'm working on this by myself for either a commission or whatever it may be, I would not have my lights or my lines this dark. The reason why, and this is why I also put in a kneaded eraser, as soon as you get this wet, even with the pencil that I had with the flowers, you're not going to be able to erase anything that's been watercolored. I don't know what it is about watercolor, but it just locks that pencil in. So if you don't want your pencil marks to be visible, erase them out with a kneaded eraser almost to the point where you can't see it. If you want it so light to where you can just see where it needs to be, but for me doing this demonstration specifically so you can see what I'm painting, I went darker. But keep that in mind for your own practice, unless you like the pencil lines, and that's okay. So then, now that I've been blathering on, this is pretty dry, so we're good. Now I'm going to get a little bit of a smaller brush, and I'm going to try and remember what colors I used. I think I used this Caput Mortem, which is a lovely like purpley brown. And I used it really quite thinned down. And I had another scrap piece of paper down here somewhere. There we go. I want that as well, so I can test my color. I think that's about right. So I'm going to just kind of block in this little mountain range. And I'm also going to just overpaint this tree because I know it's going to be darker than my mountain range. So I'm not worried about the color of this mountain range kind of affecting what I have going on in that tree, because that tree is going to obliterate whatever I have down here. And then I'm going to actually kind of charge in a little bit of like a line of color here and there. And when I'm charging with a flat brush, I tend to go sideways and use that sharp edge of my brush. Now, I've charged it, but I'm also going to lift some of this and kind of control where those darks are and how dark it is. So it's kind of like wax on, wax off. So I put some on and then I take some off, then I put some more on, and now I'm gonna probably add in a little bit of this purple because I want it to be a little bit more purpley. I feel like it's quite warm because if you look at that image, there's like a line of almost like a slightly darker color, and then that horizon line gets really light. And I don't need the horizon line to get that light, but I do want there to be that like just slightly darker area in there, just because I'm trying to like just add a little subtle shading here and there, you know? And then I'm going to also darken that over here, and I'm going to actually use a little bit of my raw umber just to kind of neutralize that purpliness a little bit more. I'm going to use just the corner of my brush just so I can get a little bit of like a dot for that, just to kind of have a little bit of variation. And remember, my tree is right there, so it's going to kind of break that up a little bit more. And before that dried, I took my brush and I softened it a little bit more. And I also overpainted right there. I don't know if you guys can see that. So if I take my brush while it's still wet, clean, with just a tiny amount of water, it's just damp, and I'm kind of lifting just that little area where I overpainted while it's still wet, now it's gone. It's perfect. So that's, I think, pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. Now I'm going to take the same blue, because I feel like it would be a good transition down into that, but I'm going to mix in with like the colors that I already have going on in my palette, that Caput Mortem, the raw umber, and a little bit of that purple, just kind of, just a subtle variation. And then I'm going to put that with a lot of water. We need it quite light. Test it a little bit, yeah. I want it quite light and over here, and I'm going to sort of put in a solid line of color, and then it almost gets a little purplier as we go over. Nope, that's the wrong purple. That was dioxazine. I'm using literally the color called purple, which is like a almost like a magenta mauve-y kind of color, and it gets a little purplier this way. And again, I'm overpainting my tree just because I know that's not going to be a problem. And then when I get over here, I'm going to start dry brushing, using a little bit more of that raw sienna just to kind of, almost like I'm having a reflection of this mountain. That was too much, so while it's wet, we work with it. That was too much wet, so we're going to dab it with our paper towel. So yeah, we're going to add a little blue, and then we're going to just dry brush this down. And then if we don't fill in every little nook and cranny, it's going to start looking like waves, which is exactly what we want. And I know this is also starting to dry, which is okay. I can it's not fully dry, so I can kind of work back into it, but I don't want that edge to get really, really dry. So I'm going to try and keep that sort of wet. Now, I want to go into some turquoise. I feel like turquoise is great, but pure turquoise is a little much. So we need to kind of tone it down by mixing it into everything we had on our palette. And so that's going to kind of dirty it up a little bit. So it's going to go a little bit more green, which I feel like is perfect for the color of this water, but it's not perfectly bright green because that would just be too much. And I also dripped water here. So if I lift that up really fast, it's not going to give me a weird bloom because that happens, which is a really great segment into my next tip. Never have your water away from your palette. So we're just going to flip-flop those because if I'm going from water over to my palette and then mixing, and then I'm now going to drip over my painting like I just did. So we're going to literally flip-flop this real fast. Sorry. There we go. I feel like that's a little bit better for you guys to see anyway. There we go. You guys can see my color mixing a little bit more. Hopefully there's not a glare. But we're going to keep going. Again, I'm trying to like keep an eye on the image and kind of where those breaks are, because I'm saving those highlights as like little waves. And then as it gets further and further down, I am going to keep dry brushing. So I don't need a whole lot of paint on my brush. I just want a little bit here and there. Now, I know this doesn't quite look right, and that's okay, because what we're going to do is we're going to layer. Sorry, trying to paint and chalk. It's not easy. So we're going to glaze in some areas. We're going to do some more like highlights and lowlights in different areas. So it's going to be a variety of blues, and I'm running out of paint on my thing here, so I need to add some more. Again, that turquoise is bright, but I need a little bit of it toned down. Maybe some of that indigo. That indigo is pretty. But this is also still a very bright blue, so I need to tone that blue down. And I like that caput mortuum because it's just a little on the purpley side of brown. So it tones it down without taking away all the blue. And I need more water because it's not quite. I also test my color on my paper towel sometimes. And I need to remember we test it on the paper. Just because I move fast sometimes. So this is where we're working almost wet on wet because it is still wet, but I need to like drag my brush, dry brushing, so I'm hitting the tops of that paper. It gets pretty dark right here. But then there's a lot of like churning water here, so I want to leave a lot of that over here. And then this is all in shadow because that little cliff area completely blocks that. I do want to keep working a little bit darker over here just to kind of have that transition a little bit better. I think this needs to be a little darker too. Now, what I did was I took a solid gradation and went into dry brushing. So you can see that transition where this is solid. I'm going to just darken it up here. And then I went into dry brushing. So what that does is kind of tricks your eye into going, this has more detail and it's closer to me, and that's why I can see more detail, and that's further away. So you can't quite see all those waves crashing and everything. It just gives that illusion just a little bit without having to paint every little nook and cranny. Work smarter, not harder. There we go. Like that. That's really pretty. Okay. So we got our water in. Everyone following along? I feel like it works so fast, but it's so simplistic sometimes, especially when you're practicing those techniques over and over and over again, and you know how they work and you know how they function, and you're like, oh, that looks like I can dry brush it. And then you just kind of automatically do these things, and it just goes by so fast. But practice is key. These are not, I need you all to understand, these are not easy things to do. We are controlling water, which is kind of insane if you think about it. But if something is not working perfectly, and if you have a moment where you're struggling with it, that is okay. You are learning, and I need you guys to remember that this is a process. This is practice. And to get good at something, you need to practice it over and over again. You're not going to be able to just whip out an entire watercolor painting like this without any practice. So if you are struggling, please keep trying. I know it's frustrating when things don't work out perfectly, but I feel like more people who are beginners really need to hear that, and that it's okay to struggle a little bit. Now, what I'm doing right now is I have this beautiful like purpley color, and I'm glazing it in this whole area because that's all in shadow. So just by putting a purple glaze over everything, it just knocked the whole area in shadow. Even the areas where like that water's crashing, because after this dries, I can add more of that blue and make it look more like it's crashing, because I kind of filled everything in. But that whole area now looks like it's in shadow because I just put a layer of purple over everything. So now I want to kind of start addressing this, which is also pretty caput mortem-y, but it's also kind of almost exposed to like the sun in the sense of like a sunset or sunrise. And when that happens, when that light is hitting something, especially sunset and sunrise, everything goes a little orange sometimes, which is really cool. And that's what's happening with a lot of what's going on over here. Now I'm going to completely ignore this entire chunk of foliage until the very end, so we can disregard all of that foliage right now. I'm just talking about this chunk of like rock and a couple of trees. All of it goes pretty orange, so I'm going to make it pretty orange, but I still like that purpley caput mortem. So if I mix that in, it takes my orange into like a more naturalistic area where it kind of tones it down, but still makes it look like it's getting hit with that sunrise, sunset kind of light. And then I'm going to use the wrong size brush and just dab that in. I have a really terrible habit of what we call getting married to a brush, and I will use that same brush for the entire painting, even though it is the wrong brush. So I'm going to just fix that right now and get a smaller brush. Okay. Sometimes you just need to remind yourself to work easier. But I did want to kind of move pretty quickly because this is still wet and I need it to actually not be weird with like a hard edge, you know, where it like starts to dry. So I just wanted to put in a little bit of sunshine, and then there's a little bit over here, and then it goes pretty brown on the tree. Now, a lot of the times people say you need to like work pretty light and then work your way to the darks. This is a pretty dark tree. I don't need to do that. That's just making a lot more work for myself than I really need to do. And I feel like it's a lot more steps that's really unnecessary sometimes. So if it's dark, you can paint it dark and just kind of go that way. Now I'm not painting it pure black. That's one thing to note. But it is one of those things that I'm painting it pretty dark brown because it is a pretty dark brown tree. Now, if I want to add in darker colors on top of this, I can still do that. I didn't go as dark as I possibly could, but I am going fairly dark on this tree. But I also just don't want to add 37 million steps. That it is a little unnecessary sometimes. So with that being the case, I also need to add in a little bit. There's a couple of rocks back there that I forgot about. So I want to add those in, but I can't do that right now because that tree is wet. So instead, I'm going to jump over here and I'm going to start layering in this same color that I'm going to use for the rocks over there. Now this is going to be like my light side of my rocks because it's a nice warm kind of tone. Now I'm not exactly trying to avoid the tree. Again, the tree is pretty dark, so I'm not super worried about painting over it because I can layer on top of it and obliterate this color that I'm already putting on there. But what I want to do is anywhere where there's light hitting the rocks, I want to get this color on there because then when I paint in the darks over top of it with layers, it's going to have that be like a nice layer of light where the darks start kind of carving away into that, which is really fun. Now, I do want to go a little bit cooler because it starts getting a little darker and cooler in comparison. Bless you. It's not a Jerry's Live unless Ming sneezes. Allergy season, guys. It happens. But yeah, so it gets a little darker and a little cooler in here, and I mean a tiny smidge cooler, but not by a ton. But I do want to do that. Go fast. Okay. Layer in that whole color before I get hard edges. Although here's the fun thing with rocks, if you have areas where they start to dry and you get like a weird hard edge, it's okay, it's a rock. Who's to say that isn't like a little area of rock that looks like that? How would they know? They're never gonna know. Especially if you don't ever show them the original photo that you base this off of. I think it's a little lighter here. And then it gets dark again over here, but this color is definitely still over here too. And then it gets darker as it goes up, but that's okay because I'm gonna just layer that in a little bit. It's kind of like a placeholder. Just laying down the whole thing. Yeah, it gets really dark down here. Really dark and very cool. So I'm going to deal with that. And as you can see by my brush doing funky things right there, there is masking fluid. I did apply that while we were on break because I wanted just a little splash. I wanted a little spray where like the water's hitting the rocks. And I might actually have to dab in a little bit of opaque white at the very end just to kind of help that be understandable. Kind of connect the purpley area to that is what I mean. Okay, so now I can apply those rocks that I forgot about over here because yeah, that's pretty dry. It dries fairly quickly, which is awesome. And I'm also realizing my hair is probably hitting the microphone, so I'm sorry if that is happening. Trying not to. All right, so tiny little rocks everywhere, cute little blobs of color. We don't have to make them into perfect little rocks. Just little dabs of color will indicate that there's sort of a rock in there. And then we're gonna paint through that tree just like that. And then all of a sudden, everything we forgot to paint in is there. Haha. Then I'm gonna add a little bit more of this caput mortuum and a little bit of that orange that I had before, which I believe was Indian yellow. I want to say it was Indian yellow. And then I'm gonna just pull that down through here. Yeah, that looks right. Need a little bit more caput mortuum. I'm going to charge it a little bit and get some of that transition between where that tree is and kind of where that goes down. Now, I have been looking down the entire time, and I just wanted to double check if we have any questions. If you do have questions while I'm painting and you wanted to know any more about the techniques or anything, please feel free, again, to pop them in the chats. We have our amazing moderator, Amanda, who can ask me live while we're here. But I'm going to stick with this caput mortuum, and my palette is dry over here. And then we're going to start transitioning from like that warmer. You can see I have like my warmer area and then my cooler area. We're going to start shifting over that way. And by using the same kind of colors, it is giving me color harmony as well. And even though I'm going to start layering these colors down to sort of create shadows, then it's one of those things that there's still an understandable connection between them, because that caput mortuum kind of does connect them quite nicely. I'm gonna actually almost forgot to fill that in, but I'm gonna take the same color and just break up that edge, make it not like a perfect line, because that was a little strange, especially for it to be kind of foliage. Foliage doesn't really ever work in a straight line, but I can take that color and kind of dab it. Again, I'm giving the indication of texture and things happening, but I'm not actually painting any very specific details. I'm just kind of blobbing, just a little dab. Dab will do ya. And then it does get really dark. Again, ignoring the foliage, that rock is turning down into space. And so if the light's hitting this way, all of this side's going to be in shadow. So we're going to want to put it in shadow, which generally speaking, all shadows are fairly cool and on like that blue purpley side. So again, with the watercolor being transparent, we can put in that beautiful purpley blue that I have kind of mixed up in with that caput mortuum. Now I have this weird line here and I know it's still wet. So if I take my brush and just kind of wiggle it down. Now my brush is clean and only damp. I'm taking most of the water off with my paper towel. That's a really fun way of getting a nice transition without having a hard edge. But it is definitely not a hard edge, but I didn't want a really rough edge right there just yet. I'm still layering in my colors. So again, just trying to like keep some of these areas not super purpley, just as like an indication that there's something else happening, like texture. And this still isn't my last layer. This is not the darkest it's going to get. We still need to get darker from here. So I'm just bringing everything to kind of this level for now. That's in shadow, I should say. Now this rock, I'm gonna leave a sliver of a little bit of light at the very top of that. Same thing with this rock, just to kind of indicate that there's light hitting a part of it. And then kind of pop this through. And then I think all of this should be relatively in shadow. So we can then, yeah, just block it in. All right. Now our shadow doesn't just start there though. It does have little areas here and there. In this area that is too dark. So I'm gonna try and pick up some of that pigment, but that's okay. If it stays pretty dark, that's all right. We're gonna have darker areas so that it's not gonna look super abnormal. Because everything in relativity, so this seems like the darkest area right now. It's still not gonna be darker than this tree. This tree is going to remain the darkest area in my entire painting because I want your eye to go to it. When I finally do paint it in, and I'm going to actually start to layer in this darker purple, this is going to be on the lighter side of the tree, but then when I start layering in the other colors, it's going to really put a lot of contrast on the tree. So that's really going to draw your eye there, which is exactly what I want. Contrast is definitely the fastest way to control the eye. So I want you to look here at the little like spray of water because that's going to be pure white, and then I want you to look here because that's going to be really dark. All right, and then we have, let's stick with that indigo. That indigo is really pretty. It's working really well, but it is a very strong color, so is caput mortuum, so I really need to water it down quite a bit. And when it comes to tree, I'm using the cat's tongue, and this is why I really love this brush, because it does almost come to a bit of a point when you want it to. I can kind of dab just the edge of that brush and the point and give almost the indication of little leaves, but I'm not actually, I'm just dabbing paint. That's all I'm doing. It's just like a little dab here and there. But that's what's making it look like I'm painting a whole tree. I'm not. I'm painting little dabs in sort of the shape, and then I'm kind of letting your eye do the rest, because you really don't need a whole lot of information for your eye to understand what's going on. You know, your brain tells me, or it tells you that that's tree. Like you don't need all the details of the leaves and all the things. It is shaped like tree, it looked like tree, it is tree. So kind of the indication of it, and that's all you really need to do. There's quite a lot of dark mass there. And then again, still only the light layer of the tree. We are still going to get darker. Okay. And I'm also going to add a little bit of this to this tree as well. Now this tree, I don't want it to really be like the focal point. So I'm going to add this for variation. Because again, this side of the tree is in shadow, so I still need form on it. But it's not my focal point. That's my focal point, as well as like this whole rock area. So that's where I want you to look. All right, then same color, just slightly less water. And we're going to have a slightly darker value. Now, the more layers you put on like this, and the slower you transition, the more realistic your painting is going to look. That is really how you get that realism kind of feel. But you can kind of get to a pretty understandable place if you even do remove quite a few of the steps. But just remember, layer, 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 and then eventually it's going to look exactly like the photo. But I like to add a ton of color to mine, so I don't usually look exactly like the photo. My artwork tends to look similar, but like with the saturation turned up, which is fun. Oh, I forgot the shadows in this area. Whoops. Again, there's a lot of shadows, but they're not all connected because there's a lot of light hitting that. Okay, cool. I don't want that hard edge. I want that to kind of come down a little bit. Now, it's almost like the sort of backside, but that transition between that side and this side is so subtle that I don't want it to be that noticeable, really. Now, there actually does get quite warm in there, but it's not quite caput mortuum. I feel like it's English red deep. We're going to add that, but we're going to add a lot of water, and we're going to tone it down because we're going to glaze. I want it to be warmer, but I don't want to have to paint a whole lot of super crazy detail, so I'm just gonna glaze and just sort of start dry brushing a glaze on in some areas. And that just warmed it up. Lovely. And I also still feel like I need a little bit more warmer over here. That's too much water and too much pigment on my brush, so I just dabbed it on my paper towel. We're going to take off some of that and then warm that up too. Have a little transition between that warmer and that cooler area. Again, too much. Take off a bunch of it, and then that glaze makes more sense. Okay, now I do need to add a little bit more turquoise. Tone it down with whatever's, again, left on the palette. We're making mud, but really pretty mud. And then I do want to take a lot of that water off of my, my brush, and then add a very soft dry brush here and there, just to sort of add some wave areas. I might actually not dry brush, and I might actually just start sort of creating dabby shapes for the water, because it's all crashing in this like little area here. But I want there to be like these crazy little pops of blue. Ah, that was too much. It's okay, we make it work. Spread it out a little bit. All right, better. Okay, I think that's a little bit better. Okay, and then I want to darken up my tree. Let me see. This one I'm going to actually use a smaller round brush, and we're going to use, I feel like that indigo and caput mortem, because it's like a blue and almost like an orangey, well, actually, you know what? English red deep. We're going to do that. That should give us a nice dark, almost purple. Maybe more indigo. Ooh, that is dark. I don't think I like that. I think I like maybe a little burnt green earth, which is actually like a lovely like orangey brown. I want it more neutrally. So when you have like an orange brown and you mix it in with like a cool blue, like an indigo or an ultramarine blue, it gives you almost like a chromatic black, which is kind of what I created here. Hopefully you guys can see that. But if I want more blue, I can go down here. And if I want more of that burnt green earth, I can add it to that. But I want to start darkening up this tree and start giving it form. Now, this is the darkest color I have on the entire thing right now, and it's making your eye go straight there, which is perfect. And because I have a nice, fine, pointed, round brush, I can start adding in little squiggly lines that indicate tree branches, but I'm not actually doing anything specific to create tree branches. Just little squiggles, and your eye tells you that it's a tree branch. They're not even connected to anything, and that's okay. Okay, and then this one goes this way. And then there's a long, dark section of tree. Because I'm not covering up every little area of the previous layer, it's giving you depth and dimension without having to try very hard. Now, when it comes to like the mass area of the tree, you should definitely have a whole lot of dark chunks, just because, you know, the more dense the foliage, the darker it's going to be, because it's throwing it all in shadow and none of the light's going to come through. So we need dark, dense area there. And leave some of that light area on the edges. Tree. I have too much. All right, so here's my favorite thing. With a round brush that has a longer bristle, if I have too much water, I'll actually put my paper towel on the back side of my bristle. Like it's not touching the tip at all, and it just kind of pulls some of that water out without totally removing everything. Okay, just dabbing it in there. And I think that tree's relatively done, but I need to put this shadow color in other little areas so that it's not just in that one spot. I need balance, and I want to balance that with this area as well, which could go between this really dark shadow color and maybe some caput mortem to kind of tie into this tree a little bit too. Because again, I have a very fine brush. I can also indicate some like sort of lines where maybe there's a rock being cracked, and then, you know, go back to dabbing dark shadows. All of that's starting to dry out on me. That's okay. This is what I love about watercolor, is that it's never all gone. Unlike acrylics that'll dry and then you can't reuse them. So all of this is in shadow. Now with this is a really lovely time to start exploring different colors, and like since this is all in like shadow, you could throw in some really funky purples or like, you know, some blues and greens and start exploring those really fun colors. I don't have the time to do all of that just yet. I'm actually going to dry brush it up a little bit so I can kind of transition that a little bit softer. But I would love to encourage you guys to do that yourself, because it's a really, like, all of the colors aren't going to matter. Value matters the most. So make sure that it's in the same kind of realm as the value that you need, and then you're good. It all just kind of works. This gets really dark down here too. So I'm going to just sort of dry brush that up, sort of kind of understand that transition. I need a little bit more caput mortem for that. I forgot about this little guy. Okay. Okay, rocks. Now we have some foliage to attack. And actually, before I do that, I am going to take my paper towel and just quickly swipe that off just a little bit, just to kind of give myself a clean palette space. Now, again, remember the top of your palette is also, or the top of your tin is also a palette. I just rarely ever use it. I always tend to do my mixing down here. Just me. Okay, so with the foliage area, again, we're working with watercolors. You work from light to dark because you want to save your lights and you want to preserve those lights. So I want to get this color of the foliage first, which is going to be like a little bit of that green gold kind of funky green color, but it's a little bit more like yellow ochre than that, because it's yellow, but it's not like pure yellow. That's like a yellow ochre. And I always look at it like it's a neutral yellow rather than like a punchy yellow. An earthy yellow is also a good way of describing it. So it's like an earthy yellow with a little tinge of green. So I also really love this olive green because that's a very naturalistic green, because like those phthalos and everything are going to be too punchy. And then I'm just going to fill in all of the foliage with not a flat wash layer. I'm not going to be super pristine about it as far as like trying to make sure everything's nice and perfect. because this is foliage. It's going to have a lot of variation. It's going to have a lot of punchy colors here and there mixed in with like more subtle colors, and that's just kind of how foliage works. It's just layer on layer on layer. So that's why I'm not super worried about the fact that I didn't finish painting that in. And the color that I'm now making might not match perfectly. That's okay. Yeah, see, doesn't, and that's okay. Because if I just kind of dab that in, that's okay. Works. Now, I'm also not going to paint probably all of this area, maybe like down here, but then that doesn't really matter because it's all dark. So I don't have to fully fill it in. It's going to get really, really dark green anyway, so it's all right. Paint what you need to. Okay. And then I think I should probably be looking at my picture here too. Again, at this point, it's sort of at the point where I can make up what I have going on. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I want it to be understandable. I think there's some lights in here, and then down here, we'll sort of fill that in. Okay. Foliage. It looks insane, doesn't it? It's okay. Because, again, this is where, like, watercolors are ugly until they're not. So it's okay if it looks like a hot mess. If anybody's looking at your artwork and going, oh, just tell them it's not done and stop judging. So I'm also taking this green and kind of popping it in some areas over here, just because like I want it, again, not to just be in one spot. I want there to be some variations of color, which is really fun, but okay. Let's grab, I think this is almost dry, and almost dry is good enough for me because I do have to mix another color, but for this next color, I want to go a step darker, not pure darkness, but a step darker. And for that, I'm probably gonna go with this olive green because it's quite lovely. And I might even add a little bit of oxide of chromium, which is a pretty opaque color as far as watercolor goes, but it's a fun green. Those two tend to be pretty neutral green. So when I say neutral green, I want to kind of show you this. Neutral greens, because they look like they occur in nature. These are like fluorescent crazy party green, so are these, and that's why they don't work great unless you're painting like the jungle, where those deeper bluer greens kind of actually naturally occur. But even then, it's not very often that you're going to see that, if ever. Now with this color, I'm going to mostly cover up already what I did. I'm going to try and keep some little spots of that bright yellow green exposed, and that's where the light is hitting those leaves. And again, the light is coming from here over, so it's going to hit the tops of the leaves that are kind of on this side. So with this tree branch, this side's in shadow, this side's in light. So I'm going to just darken all of the side of it and then keep some of those lights. It doesn't have to be exactly perfect. Again, we're just sort of dabbing things around and giving the impression of leaves and stuff. Again, I want it to look like the whole foreground is kind of almost blurred because you're looking past it and looking at this tree. That's why a lot of the times your foreground should be as in detail as, or more in detail than the previous layer, but in some instances, your foreground can be blurred out where it looks almost like your vision has ignored it. Like if I'm looking at the camera at you guys right now, all of this in front of the table is blurry to me. So that's kind of what I'm going for. I know there's a word for it, but I can't remember. All right, and then we're just gonna dab this in all the different areas. Now, this green is probably where I'm going to cover this down here, because I want my darks to be potentially over top of this and have some of maybe this shine through. I don't know yet. Haven't dabbed that color yet. But I do need to look at this so that I know what I'm painting. All right. And then this is in shadow. I'm trying to break it down into like big chunks. So like this chunk. And I'm not being super precious about it because, again, if I don't paint this exactly like you see in the photo, who is going to know? I mean, you guys know because you see the image and you can judge that, but nobody else is going to know. Get a little bit more of that green. Okay. Kind of block in all of this. There's like a little light area that way. And then all of this is in dark too. Darkness. There's a little dab of light here. And then it kind of goes up into these tree branches that are also still dark on the one side. All right. I'm curious, is there anybody who is watching along who's going to attempt to paint this picture or is painting along with me now? I would love to know. And if you do actually paint this image or do any of these techniques, and beyond having questions, if you are one of those people who would love to post it and tag us in it, I would love to see your work. It always makes me very happy to see you guys follow along or participating, especially because, like, you know, it's something that I love, and I love seeing you guys experience it as well. Brings me joy. All right, so I have a lot of lines down here, and I'm like, I don't know what those are. It's okay. We're just gonna cover them up. Nobody knows. How would they know? Ain't nobody gonna know. Sort of darkness in here. Okay. And then I think that's about all in darkness here. Okay. Now we have this little area where it gets more light in spots. And I forgot a rock over here, but that's okay. We can do that later. It's not over until it's over, right? Or until everybody in the team tells me, okay, we're done. All right, and then I have a couple more lights over here that I want to preserve. Again, I'm not being precious about it. There's like one little spot there, and then a little spot there, which is why I just swiped that original lighter color. And I am actually applying quite a lot of pigment right now as well. Which is okay because I know that the next layers can interact with them, but I'm also not scrubbing when it comes to the next layers, so I'm just going to be dabbing those on as well. So it's going to be one of those things where, like, the more you scrub at a watercolor, the more you're going to activate those previous layers, and that's when you can have those interactions that are unintentional. But also because I'm going darker even if I scrub at them, you might see that the pigment is getting picked up, but very, very subtly, and it won't be all that noticeable, which is why working dark to light in watercolors is the important thing to do. So this stage of foliage is done. Now we need to tone down some of that green because it seems a little crazy, right? And then I think to do that, I'm going to add some Payne's Gray. And, well, so I'm probably going to add Payne's Gray and Raw Umber just to kind of give it like a more neutrally darker feel. But that I think is the plan, but you could do both in separate layers and then layer one and layer the other just for variation, which would be fun. But I am going to mix it in with the original greens that I was mixing. So did we have a question though?
Yeah, Ralph was wondering if you preferred this cat's tongue brush to a round brush and why or why not.
I am a flat brush, filbert brush, cat's tongue brush kind of girly. That is my personal preference. That's just because of how I personally paint and the fact that I like to use this side for a big stroke and then I can turn it and you see how thin that gets. For me, this is a really versatile brush, whether it's a cat's tongue, a filbert, which is a little bit more rounded, or a flat bristle brush, or even like a bright. A bright is a flat that's just a little shorter, just so anybody knows. That's the way that I paint, as I use my brush in various different ways and very different like directions. And for me, that's just like almost like a shorthand, where instead of like having to grab this brush for fine lines and dots, I can have a cat's tongue where if I turn it sideways, I can get a fine line, and if I make that point, I can now get dots. It's just, for me, a tool that is a little bit more versatile, but again, that is based off of how I paint. So if you paint a different way, it might not be as beneficial, but it's one of those things that is great for, this is why I like the set that I gave you, and I don't even have all the brushes in my hand. This has round, cat's tongue, and flat in it. I like getting those, or even our Try Me brushes. They have it in a lot of different types of brushes, and a lot of the times they come with a variety of shapes. That way you can try different bristle types, you can try different shapes, and you can see what works best for you, because everyone's going to be different on that. So, sorry, my answer is sort of a non-answer, but an answer. So, but that was a great question though. Thank you. All right, I want a little bit more green to this. Okay, dark green. Now we're gonna start again from this corner and work our way over. And actually this is where I'm remembering I have a smaller cat's tongue brush, which I need a smaller brush because I'm starting to get into more detail with my foliage. Again, I don't want to get super detailed, so I don't want to get a teeny tiny little brush, but I do want to be able to make smaller marks with this, because this is probably going to be my last layer for this. I probably would go even darker if I were to paint this again on my own, but you know, considering we are getting to the end of our time here, and you guys get the idea of me layering and layering and layering. I feel like it's almost like watching paint dry. But I do want to show you the difference between like the different areas when we do finally get completely done here. Now I will say I am realizing that this green is nowhere else in this painting, so I'm going to add a little bit more to this foliage up here. Just a little dab will do ya, and now it marries those colors together, and it darkens it just a little bit more, which is great. All right, so Again, just adding a little darkness to the foliage that I already painted. So I'm not touching that brighter areas, or I'm trying not to touch the brighter areas that I had before. I'm just trying to darken some of the areas in between. So like smaller shapes on top of the darker green that I laid down. So I'm taking away, kind of carving those shapes out as I go. And with this being such a dark color, I can, ooh, that's a really pretty. I can also go over the background as well, and it will pop on top of it without much of a problem because it is still darker than that, like this. So if I want to like bring this tree branch up a little bit more, I can. Or give a little bit more variation to like the edges over here that's got the water. And then add these in. I don't want to completely obliterate all that. Now, because this is also so blue, I could also, like I said, have a little bit more of a bluer shade, and then I could always do a glaze. Like if I take a step back and go, ooh, that's, I don't love that. It's a little too yellow. I can then glaze something on top and kind of tone it down a little bit, which is really lovely. Kind of correcting your color, almost like you put a filter over top of the whole thing, which is awesome. So again, the colors that I'm using right now are the olive green, oxide of chromium, Payne's gray, and that raw umber. I had a little too much raw umber, so I needed a little bit of everything else. All right, and this gets pretty dark in here. And I'm just dabbing. No special brush stroke, just little dib dabs. And then a little bit in here. And if you do take a little bit of that darkness into the brighter areas, it does add more contrast, so you could have your eye kind of go that direction as well, which is cool and also useful. Again, if you're trying to balance the composition and kind of where the eye goes, that's a really fun way of doing it, is contrast. All right. Probably going to leave a little bit more of that lighter green exposed in here than I see in the actual. That was a lot of Payne's gray. Again, Lucas is amazing at how fast they your pigments in the pans reactivate. So like you get a lot of pigment real fast. Your Payne's gray is dark. Okay. There's a little bit of light. Kind of go around those. And then last little areas down here.
Hey, Emmy. What is your ratio of water to paint at this stage?
I'm using a lot of pigment, a lot of paint rather than a lot of water. Now I do have a very wet puddle over here, but if I were to have a lot more, like you can see it's quite pigmented. If I were to have a lot more water, it's just going to be a lot lighter. So you can see like the difference in I'm using almost straight paint because I want it to be really dark. And so with that, I need either a very dark pigment or I need a lot of pigment. And because I want it super dark, I got both. Great question. Okay. Doop. Just dabbing in little areas. And then we are almost done. Man. Kind of. Also, if I do a little bit of dry brushing with this foliage color, it does also look almost like little leaf areas if I leave some of that color exposed, which is really fun. Okay. All right, and then I think I just need to fill in the bottom and we're about done. And then all I wanted to do was take this off the block for you guys. And then I think that's it for the show. Yeah, whole painting. Ta-da! Now, like I said, standing back on this now, I am noticing that a lot of that light foliage got a little too like light yellow-green, because remember that sunset color goes pretty orange, which is why it feels a little bit more yellow ochre-y. But because I have that layer on there that's still wet, it's definitely not something I would want to touch just yet, but I might be able to do a little bit of a glaze over here and show you guys. So that gold ochre is actually quite lovely because it's a pretty naturalistic orangey kind of yellow brown. So if I were to like glaze that over those light areas, I can kind of warm that up and make that understandable with the other layers that I have going on. Like the light that's in the background now sort of matches what's going on. I'm also trying not to like make the dark green bleed into anything. But remember, it is a blurry foreground, so maybe that actually helps us. So yeah, let's just glaze the whole thing. Why not? And I only need to glaze the light areas, really. That's it. But this is what happens with painting, is sometimes you take a step back, and it's always important to take a step back, which is why I love that we have like a 5-minute break, is that if you have like just a little bit of time to walk away from your painting, it's beneficial because you come at it with fresh eyes afterwards and go, oh yeah, that's not right. And then you can adjust it and make it a little bit more understandable. Yeah, see, just by doing that, I think that is way better, because that was just a little too bright and a little too yellow. And I might even, again, darken that even further, but that color matches what's going on over here a lot more than it was before. But again, even then, it's just slight variations. And then, you know, the more, excuse my brushes, the more layers you do, the more refined it gets. So I have that like the more dark blue kind of shadows that I have in this tree. I also brought it down here, and I think I darkened that a lot more. So again, that contrast, like even though this is the same level of darkness, because it does balance it out, it still pulls your eye. That darkness seems to be right here, right? So it pulls your eye straight to that tree, because that has the most contrast. And that is exactly what I wanted. Now, while I am removing the little splatter of masking fluid, can I please ask somebody to get me a palette knife, because I forgot that, so I can remove this from the block. It's up there. Oh yeah, actually that cup. All right, so I'm going to remove this from the the picture. Thank you so much. Oh, you got me one of the stabby ones, huh? All right, so I just wanted a little bit of splatter so that it looks like I have water splashing up, which is perfect. But now that I took that off, I am now noticing that that is the stuff that's in shadow. So even though I kept that as like my whites, I would probably tone that down with a little bit of purple, the same kind of purple that it's here, because even though it's a splatter, it is still in shadow. So that is a little bright for me, but that's okay. We'll deal with that. But I also probably would have loved to keep some of the highlights in my water just for a little extra sparkle. But when removing anything from a block, paper, watercolor, whatever it may be, you have to make sure it's dry. I feel like I've repeated that a lot. So now that it's all quite wet, don't do this, wait for it to dry, but I did want to show you this before we go. So like I said, it's glued on all four sides except for this little spot right here. It's probably about 1.5 inches. So what I'm gonna do is take a very clean palette knife and just sort of like slowly, you can even use a little bit of like a sawing motion to kind of help it guide through. You're going to break that glue that's holding it to your block, right? Trying to do this for the camera, which is very difficult because it's left-handed for me. Also push it all the way through. Okay, now do the other sides, and then try not to break something in the process. Again, I am working on I would have moved actually I'm gonna move that. It's like normally I move everything. There we go. And now you have just a piece of paper off of the whole block that you can then take and go frame and sell or give away to somebody who loves your paintings, whatever, or hang it on your wall, either way, whatever you would like to do with your artwork. And this, by the way, I'm not as worried about this coming out of the block as the other ones because this happens to be 300 pound, which is very thick in comparison to the other one, which is 140 pounds. So this is about double the thickness. I don't think that's gonna ever go into focus. So there you go. But there we go. We did an entire painting, guys. I'm very proud. That was Watercolor for Beginners. I hope you guys have learned lots. I know that was a lot of information and a lot of techniques. So feel free to rewatch this anytime you need to. It's always available for you to rewatch forever. But if you did enjoy this workshop, please make sure you hit the like button and share it with your friends, especially if they can use some more information on watercolors or if they need a refresher. Make sure to follow along for all of our social media posts and everything that's coming up. And if you are interested in a future Jerry's Live workshop, you can always go to the website and in the search bar, type in Jerry's Live. Just Jerry's Live, and then you'll be able to go to our schedule where all of our workshops are listed, and then you have also our teacher's cart that has all of our supplies. That way you know what we're doing in the future. And I'm very excited. We might even have a special guest coming. Keep that on the DL, but nobody knows. But of course, also, if you do post this to any social media, make sure you tag us at JerrysArtarama. I would love to see what you guys create. It makes me so happy. And of course, if you have any other workshop requests for the future, type it in the comments. Anything that you want to learn, something that we haven't done before. But that was everything, and I will see you guys in a couple months. Thank you.